Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pro Wrestling Inside and Out. Folks, we're going to be talking about old school wrestling. What is old school? And the reason we're doing this, Dr. Philbo Grass, he sent us a question. And the question was the panel's thought on SWE Fury. That is Southwest Wrestling Entertainment out of Texas. He said he watched some of their programming on YouTube. They claim to be old school. I guess this would be the question we have to ask. And I'll have to ask this question first. This is the first question we ask. Do you believe, and I'll let Rodney answer this first. Do you believe that wrestling companies know what old school wrestling is?
No.
Jack, does people promoting wrestling know what old school wrestling is?
Promoting? No. They have some people that work for them that certainly do, but they don't utilize them.
Let's talk about Southwest the SWE. Let's talk about it specifically because this is what Dr. Phil Bogras asked us to talk about. I have watched the last 4 episodes of their television program. Is it old school? No. Could it be? Yes. Is it old school? No. Rodney, explain to the people what you believe old school wrestling. What is the definition of an old school wrestling?
Okay, here we go. I'm ready for the hate mail coming very shortly. First and foremost, you cannot have a ramp coming up to the ring apron. That is no can do. Secondly, you must have 2 different dressing rooms. People cannot come from the same way. You have to have clear heels and babyface. I hate to use those terminology, but you simply have to do that. It is not old school unless you do. So coming from one direction, everybody coming out of the same dressing room doesn't cut it. You do have to have 2 different ways they should be coming to the ring. That is first and foremost. And you must have clearly set and defined roles that people are playing. If you don't have it, you're not old school. Secondly, you need to cut out anything that would be considered against the rules. Typically, wrestling all over the floor on television is normally not done. That is something you reserve for your house shows. You don't do that on live TV. Secondly, using foreign objects repeatedly, chairs, tables, and that kind of thing, you don't overuse them. Because honestly, if you're going to do it legitimately, which old school is, you hit somebody with a chair, you go down, that's it. There's no coming back. That's it. That's the end of it. Or use of a pile driver is the end. And like he was talking about, language. Sometimes there was, sometimes there wasn't. We were always in places that they didn't allow, any kind of profanity. But that's my idea of old school wrestling. And especially when you're having a house show, you don't light the entire arena. You only have a ring light, and occasionally you'll do a spotlight going to the ring. But like I said, clearly defined sides, clearly defined teams coming from different directions, not from one side, opposite sides of the building, different entrances, whatever, but not the same way.
Jack,
did I do that?
Old school wrestling. What is your definition of old school wrestling?
Well, I agree with everything Rodney said. And I think there's a certain style as far as the way shows are presented also that are old school. And I made a post today that a few people didn't agree with about knowing your rule on a show. It's not the opening match. If you stole the show, that's the last show you're doing for me, because that's not your job. Every match is set a certain way and everybody has a certain responsibility, but you can't have people standing on their feet in the first 2 or 3 matches, because then they're too tired to stand up for when it counts, because your main event is what people are paying to see. And that's where they need to get the most excitement from. And so, if you're blowing the doors off in the first few matches, you're not doing your job. You're supposed to establish good, solid wrestling, but stay in your lane. and it's just the mentality. The storytelling is more important than doing any amount of spots. You know, if you can get over with an arm bar, and that used to happen because it was done in a believable fashion.
Mhm.
You know, we were talking about Ivan Koloff recently, and Alexis Smirnoff when they were the tag team champions in Georgia, and they did a very simple, straightforward match of where they would get a baby face in the corner and just tag in and out while they had the guy in an arm
Yes.
bar on the mat. You know, was it exciting? No. Were people watching it? Yes, because they believed what they were doing was killing that guy. And
And
that is what we're missing. The believability, making people emotionally invest, that was old school.
And also the old school mentality is a lot of people talk about the word kayfabe, and they believe they know what that means. And to a certain extent, people really don't know what it means. They use it, but they don't know what it means. Kayfabe was a word that was said. If me and Jack were talking about professional wrestling at the high school gymnasium and we were going over something, and he saw somebody walking towards me, he'd say, "Hey, kayfabe," so that we wouldn't talk about it in front of the guy. But it also is a concept. It was a concept. It was a concept of protecting the finish, basically. You would protect what you were doing, because if you were out there, and we talked about it before, we talked about Jim Duggan and what was his name, Steve Williams, going out after the matches. Well, they wasn't protecting. They wasn't kayfabe. They wasn't protecting the finish, because now they're out there. If you went out there and you wrestled and you fought each other tooth and nail and you were mad at each other, and the next thing you know, you saw them out there. So they wasn't protecting the gimmick. They wasn't protecting. So kayfabe is basically protecting the business, and by the 80s, it wasn't been done anyway. So the business was being unprotected as well. But old school wrestling, I go back to say old school wrestling was it kind of stopped in the 1980s. Old school wrestling was not, when I talk about old school wrestling, it's 1970s. The 1970s was old school wrestling. If you were to smarten off somebody in 1976, you would have got beat up so bad in the dressing room that there would have been nothing left of you you would never been able to wrestle again. They would have made sure of that. And so I think old school wrestling. Now let's talk SWE. Is it old school wrestling? And I say no, it's not old school wrestling. They have a couple of things that they try to do as far as old school wrestling. They say you can't hit somebody in the face with a fist. I like that deal. But why does it matter if you're going to turn right around? You're going to have two matches on the same card that fight outside into the building. It defeats the purpose of having a professional wrestling match. You would allow that to happen one time, but I don't think you would allow that happen on two shows. You would actually, if it was legitimate and you were legitimately producing a wrestling show, you would actually say, listen, we're going to put you in a cage and you're going to have a cage match. But why would you do it just for the sake of doing it? I watched two guys do it, and I can't remember even who the guys were. And I hate to be critical of something, but don't tell people you're doing old school wrestling if you don't know what old school wrestling is. And whoever is the promoter, whoever takes here, you're not doing old school wrestling. And it's you could. There's a possibility. The wrestlers there's some great wrestlers there. They're a tag team there that I don't even know what their names are. Maybe OMG. That's tremendous wrestlers. Rodney Mack, just a tremendous wrestler. The Mantell guy, whatever that guy.
Moonshine Mantell.
Great wrestler. How do you say that name? Castellino or something like that. Great wrestler. I mean, they have the ability to be old school, but you can't be old school if you don't tell the story.
And it's what I notice is they do stuff that are safe. They went with the safe. The shows that I watched, it starts like every other wrestling show does. Here comes somebody with a microphone heading to the ring. This time it was Teddy Long. I understand he was the general manager, and then making matches on the fly. They did that as well, which is typically seen on every other show. To me, if you're old school, just like Lance Russell and Dave Brown. Oh boy, we've got a big show for you, Dave. What's on the card today? And Dave would run down the entire card for that show. He would come down, it would be, we're going to see the Fabulous Ones will be in tag team action, and they'll face so and so and such and such. And in our main event, the Mid-America Heavyweight Championship, in our expiration of time, Bobby Eaton will face Bill Dundee. And then, of course, Lance would say, oh, that's going to be a big show. And you just stay right where you're at. We'll be right back when we get the action started. And, it's just, and you very rarely have them run down the entire card. Very rare on any show. You will have them very rarely run down the entire card.
And it does it. And I seen something else on this show, the announcers. It was Kevin Sullivan. I don't know who the other guy was. He's some English talking guy. And
there was a manager. There's a manager that's the English.
Yeah, whatever that guy's name
with the British accent. Yeah,
I don't even know his name. And whatever the announcer's name was.
I think
they're going out and they're fighting. They're out here. They're fighting out there in the crowd, and they're going up there, and they make a joke about the guy's head getting slammed to the Alamo. And instead of taking that serious, they make a joke out of two guys wrestling, fighting each other on the floor. And then they go and they take the one guy and throw him out. And he goes rolling down the steps. He goes past the steps, and the guy says, well, at least he went past the steps. That was supposed to be a legitimate fight, and they made a joke about it. And that's what's wrong. That's why it's not old school. Gordon Solie would not have made a joke in 1970 about anything going in the ring. He might have it not in the late 1980s, but he did not do that in the 1970s, when really and truly the wrestlers protected the wrestling business. And Jack, what do you think about old school wrestling? Is SWE old school to you?
No, and the thing is they started out that way. They were really trying to adhere to the old school principles, doing a family type show. I kind of got off track watching them about 6 months ago because one of the guys that I really liked so well, Brent McKenzie, decided to retire from the business. And so I just kind of, quit watching. But then I've heard the same things y'all have been saying about them, especially the language part. That distresses me, because I watch MLW. And I think the wrestling is very good. I think their storytelling is very good. But they have such language on there that, there's no way I can watch that when my kids are here, and I don't like that. Because the thing that I liked about wrestling, the old school, was the fact that I could sit on my granddaddy's knee, who was a Baptist preacher, and we could watch wrestling, and stuff did not get said or done in a way that offended my grandfather. And that I miss that.
And every match on your TV, by the way, folks, does not have to be the biggest match that was ever signed.
Yep.
There's sometimes just get somebody over.
Yep.
That's right. The whole purpose, to get somebody over. Robert Grice, by the way, said, I could not sit through the SWE ladies match. I felt more pain than the wrestlers. Honestly. And I think the lady could be great. I think could be great, but she is not championship material. She is, let me just tell you this, she is no Wendy Richter. She is no Sherry Martel. She is no Trish Stratus. She is no Medusa. She needs to learn a little bit about wrestling. And the slap in the knee, the slapping that she does 22 times in the match, got to be, that stuff's got to be over, because you're limiting yourself when a new wrestling person, or not even a wrestling fan, but a new person turns that show on and they see that, they say, oh man, this is so hokey. I'm turning this crap off. I'm going to go watch Netflix, because I think they're redoing reruns of Friends on there, and I can watch that. And it's quality entertainment. And
absolutely. And part of the issue, and we were talking about, and I made mention in our live show about, they had two, I guess, bad guys wrestling each other in a match, and the people booed both. That is a problem with whoever put that match together. It didn't make any difference. You can establish that easily in a match. Easily. There is techniques that are not being used now. Simply putting your hand out, shaking your hand, going down on one knee with one hand behind your back, trying to shake the guy's hand, will establish it immediately. Another thing is begging off, which is unheard of. I saw the Mitts do it once, and I thought he was doing a great job, and then he doesn't do it anymore. And if you'll watch, that's how Flair was able to manipulate the Doom. Even though they had Teddy Long, Flair and Arn Anderson was declared the bad guys in the match, simply because Flair begged off from Doom, and you would very rarely see Ron Simmons or Butch Reed in any capacity do that. In any case, he didn't ever. Butch Reed never done it in Mid-South ever.
Well, we could talk a whole lot more about this. We could go on for 25, 30 minutes. Like we said, great professional wrestlers out there today. They just need some direction and some good booking, some good storytelling. If that could happen. And by the way, Russell South coming soon. Make sure you watch that. That'll be Saturday, May 8th, and you'll see what old school wrestling is supposed to be like. So go to WrestleSouth.com and find more information about that. If you enjoyed this video, give us the big thumbs up. Subscribe to the page and go one step further, hit that notification bell and share the page. And by the way, thank you, Dr. Phil Bogrice. And I hope we answered your question, even though we get a little passionate when we talk about old school wrestling here. We grew up in the wrestling. Me and Rodney grew up in the wrestling business from 1970 to 1996. We were part of the wrestling business, and we get a little passionate when we talk professional wrestling. We love it. And we love professional wrestling, not sports entertainment. We'll see you in the next video.